Welcome to the Foundations of America. Today's video titled Survival, Belief, and Blood, the Birth of Early America. Thank you for being here. This video is made for listening, so wherever you are, settle in and let the story unfold. Today we're stepping into the earliest chapters of American history, long before independence, long before the nation even existed. We're going to explore how people arrived, how societies formed, how conflict reshaped entire worlds, and how, slowly, a new identity began to emerge. Because the story of early America isn't just about beginnings, it's about survival, belief, and in the long, often painful creation of something entirely new. Thousands of years ago during the last ice age, groups of people moved gradually from Asia to North America, likely crossing a land bridge that connected Siberia and Alaska. This movement did not happen all at once. It unfolded over generations, as families adapted to new climates, new animals, and unfamiliar terrain. Over time, they spread across the continents, forming the many indigenous societies that would define the Americas long before European arrival. These societies were deeply varied. Some lived as nomadic hunters, moving with the season and following animal migrations. Others built agricultural communities, growing crops like maize and establishing permanent settlements. In regions further south, civilizations such as the Aztec and Inca developed large urban centers, complex political systems, and advanced knowledge in engineering, astronomy, and mathematics. Across the Americas, people understood their environments with a level of familiarity and respect that came from generations of experience. For centuries, the world existed on its own terms. Occasional contacts, such as the arrival of Norse explorers around the year 1000, left only limited traces. It was not until late 15th century that sustained contact with Europe began, and when it did, it brought change on a scale no one could have anticipated. The forces behind this contact were rooted in transformations taking place across Europe. Trade had expanded, especially after the Crusades, introducing new goods and ideas. Nations were growing more competitive, searching for wealth and influence. Advances in navigation, including improved ship design and the use of tools like the compass, made longer ocean voyages possible. In this environment, exploration became both an opportunity and a necessity. In 1492, Christopher Columbus set out to find a westward route to Asia. Instead, he encountered lands previously unknown to Europeans. Although he believed he had reached the East Indies, his voyage had opened the door to a new era of exploration, conquest, and colonization. Spain moved quickly, sending expeditions that resulted in the fall of powerful indigenous empires. Conquistadors such as Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro relied on a combination of military force, alliances, and devastating spread of disease. Smallpox and other illnesses weakened indigenous populations at a scale that reshaped entire regions. The wealth extracted from these lands, particularly gold and silver, flowed back to Spain, strengthening its position in Europe, while also creating new economic challenges, including inflation. Other nations soon followed. France focused on trade, especially in furs, building relationships with indigenous groups in the north. Each approach reflected different priorities, but all were part of a broader pattern of expansion. England's efforts began with difficulty. Early settlements, including Roanoke, failed. It was not until 1607, with the founding of Jamestown, that a lasting English presence took hold. Even then, survival was uncertain. The settlers who arrived at Jamestown were not prepared for what they encountered. Many had expected to find wealth quickly, but instead faced disease, food shortages, and environmental challenges that they could not understand. Leadership was often inconsistent, and tensions with the colony made cooperation difficult. During the winter of 1609 to 1610, known as the Starving Time, the situation became desperate. Food supplies ran out and the colony came close to collapse. Survival required not only endurance, but also adaptation. The Powhatan Confederacy played a central role in the early years of Jamestown. Led by Chief Powhatan and influenced by figures like Opechancanough, this was a powerful and organized society. Relations between the English and Powhatan people shifted constantly, moving between cautious cooperation and open conflict. Pocahontas, often remembered for her connection to the English, was part of this complex relationship. Her marriage to John Rolfe created a temporary period of relative peace, but it did not resolve underlying tensions. As more settlers arrived and demanded land, those tensions increased. The English expanded outward, often without regard for existing indigenous tribes. In 1622, Opechancanough led a coordinated attack on the English settlements, killing hundreds of colonists. This event marked a turning point, hardening attitudes on both sides. What had once been a fragile coexistence became a sustained conflict, as the English responded with force and gradually asserted control over the region. At the same time, economic changes were reshaping the colony. The cultivation of tobacco transformed Virginia into a profitable enterprise. Demand in Europe grew rapidly, turning tobacco into a key export. This success encouraged further expansion, but it also created a need for labor on a scale the colony had not previously experienced. Initially, this labor came from indentured servants who worked for a set number of years in exchange for passage to America. Over time, however, a more permanent system began to develop. The arrival of Africans in 1619 marked the beginning of the transition that would lead to the establishment of racial slavery. This change did not happen immediately, but through a series of legal and social developments. Slavery became an entrenched part of colonial life, particularly in the southern colonies. This system would shape the economic and social structures of the region in profound ways. While the southern colonies developed around plantation agriculture, the northern colonies followed a different path. In New England, many settlers arrived for religious reasons. The Pilgrims, who established Plymouth Colony in 1620, created the Mayflower Compact, an agreement that emphasized self-governance and a collective decision-making. That communities could govern themselves became an important part of colonial development. The Puritans, who later established the Massachusetts Bay Colony, sought to build a society based on their religious ideals. They envisioned their community as a model for others, a city upon a hill. However, maintaining unity proved difficult. Figures such as Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson challenged established authority, advocating for greater religious freedom and individual expression. Their dissent led to the creation of new colonies, including Rhode Island, where different approaches to belief and governance could be explored. The middle colonies developed in yet another direction. Places like Pennsylvania became known for their diversity and relative tolerance. Under the leadership of William Penn, Pennsylvania was founded on principles of religious freedom and fair treatment of indigenous peoples. It attracted settlers from a variety of backgrounds, creating more varied and dynamic society. Trade and agriculture supported economic growth, while the colony's policies encouraged cooperation among different groups. Across the colonies, patterns of self-governance became more established. Local assemblies allowed colonists to participate in decision-making, and over time this experience shaped their expectations about authority. Britain, for a time, allowed this system to continue under what is often called salutary neglect. While the colonies remained part of the British Empire, they operated with a significant degree of independence. At the same time, the colonies were closely tied to a larger economic system. Through trade networks that connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas, goods and people moved across the Atlantic in complex patterns. Mercantilist policies ensured that the colonies provided raw materials while serving as markets for British goods. The system supported economic growth, but it also reinforced the colonies' dependence on Britain. As colonial societies developed, differences in wealth and status became more pronounced. In port cities like Boston, merchants gained influence through trade, while in rural areas, land ownership remained a key source of power. Despite these differences, colonists shared a common experience of living at a distance from centralized authority. This distance allowed them to develop their own institutions and ways of thinking. In the early 18th century, a religious movement known as the First Great Awakening swept through the colonies. Preachers such as Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield delivered sermons that emphasized personal faith and emotional engagement. Their message encouraged individuals to take responsibility for their beliefs, challenging established religious authority, and promoting a more personal approach to faith. By encouraging people to think independently, it contributed to a growing sense of individual responsibility and self-awareness. These ideas extended beyond religion, influencing the way people thought about authority and governance. While the Great Awakening was primarily a religious movement, it helped shape the intellectual environment of the colonies. Meanwhile, competition between European powers continued to influence events in North America. The French and Indian War, which ended in 1763, resulted in a significant shift in control. Managing this expanded empire required resources, and it led to changes in the relationship between Britain and its colonies. For the colonists, this marked a turning point. After years of relative independence, they began to face increased oversight. At the same time, they had already developed their own systems of governance and growing sense of identity. They were no longer simply extensions of England, but communities shaped by their own experiences. This identity did not emerge all at once. It developed gradually, influenced by geography, economics, belief, and conflict. Colonists had learned to adapt, to govern themselves, and to navigate the challenges of life in a new environment. These experiences created a foundation for the changes that would follow. By the mid-18th century, the colonies were no longer just settlements. They were societies with their own structures, expectations, and perspectives. And as pressures from Britain increased, these differences would become more significant. The story of early America is not just a story of arrival. It is a story of transformation, of people who came from different places and, over time, became something new. It is a story shaped by survival, belief, and conflict, and it is the beginning of a much larger narrative that would continue to unfold. This video was inspired by A Short History of the United States, From the Arrival of Native American Tribes to the Obama Presidency by Robert V. Remini. If you're interested in exploring these events in greater depth, the book provides a clear and engaging overview of American history. Thank you for taking the time to listen and be part of this journey. There's always more beneath the surface of history, and the more you explore it, the more it begins to connect. Until next time, keep looking deeper.